everybody. Welcome to Weighing In with Andy Hamilton and David Mirikitani. David Mirikitani is on the phone joining you from St. Louis, and I'm Andy Hamilton coming to you from the bubbly banks of the Birdsall Park Pond in Cedar Falls, Iowa. David, the last thing that I do every Monday night is, before I go to bed, I put together the Track Wrestling Weekly newsletter that goes out on Tuesdays, and I wrap that thing up at around 1 o'clock, and I hear this commotion outside. We just moved into a new neighborhood. I hear this commotion outside. I look outside my living room window, and there are a bunch of kids over in the rock pile. We've got a rock pile and waterfall that comes out of it right next door as you come into our development. And here is like a 5-foot-tall wall of bubbles that stretched 50 feet out across the street. That those kids that were hanging out over there put dish soap out there and basically flooded the street out here. And there's a car that pulled up and had to come to a stop until the bubbles subsided. So anyway, that's what went on in my neighborhood. How about yours? What's going on down there?
Well, I was in Tulsa for the weekend, and many thanks to Kevin Kretschmer for the hospitality. And then I went to Stillwater on Sunday and interviewed John Smith for track. And Sunday night I stayed with Coach Guerrero, and I was on the phone late talking to somebody back home, and literally I witnessed a one-car accident right in front of Eric's house. I'm giggling because everybody's okay, but literally the guy, I found out later, he fell asleep, slammed on the brakes. There's about a 35-foot skid mark in the middle of the road, and he made friends with the curb right in front of Eric's neighborhood. So it was it's probably the opposite of clean, opposite of bubbles, but it was, I was on the phone and kind of went holy hell to the person on the phone I was with. So probably not as fun as what you saw, but it was a little crazy kind of watching this car, peel out and do a U-turn in the middle of the road at about 10:30 at night. So kind of crazy
Yikes.
stuff. Yeah.
Yikes. Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, you were at the Junior Duels, and we had that on Track Wrestling last weekend, and the action in the final rounds especially of that tournament was unbelievable. It was so entertaining. David, what did you learn during your time in Tulsa?
I love Junior Duels. I love them more. I haven't gone in a couple of years. I loved going and recruiting it, and I loved being back there for you guys. I think there's just a cool camaraderie about it. Like the guys sit together. You're watching your buddy wrestle. Like if you're the weight class above or below me, you're watching him wrestle. Not like, okay, well, Andy's out on mat 13 in Fargo, and I just got to be in the back getting ready. I mean, and the team scores are, you kind of think you have it mapped out, and it's just, it's a different scoring system, and you see these coaches like, I'm down 8-0, and they point like, you got to get 1 point, and kid gets 1 point, and the whole team goes crazy. And I'm sure we'll dig into some of the individual results, but it was really cool. Oklahoma just ran the table early, and, the crowd was going nuts, and Ohio was sneaky good. Illinois was Illinois, although Illinois and Ohio had an unbelievable duel in the semis where it came down to the last match. And then I think the surprise team of the tournament had to be Minnesota, and I know we're going to talk about them, but they won that thing without Brady Berge, without Gable Stevenson, and without their 113-pounder, whose name I can't think of right now, but who's a top 5 kid in the country. Yeah, Cashman. So those three, and everybody leaves some kids at home. So it's kind of like at the end of the year when you're coaching in college, you go, well, so-and-so is healthy. Well, nobody's healthy, after 5 months of wrestling. But they left behind 3 legit dudes and still won that tournament. So, and doing the interviews were really fun. I thought Jake Aller was, really good, really honest. Dayton Fix, if for some reason, when he retires, he's got a job as a professional cornerman telling guys off. And it was just fun, listening to some of the guys like Hardell Moore that had a bunch of his kids wrestling in that event. It was it's a neat thing. If you're a kind of a junkie and like of wrestling and like to watch really young talent, it's a cool environment for sure.
Absolutely. And we had some unbelievable action in those matches, and we'll get into the Jake Aller, Zach Bronigal match, 15-14, one of the tipping points in that dual meet between Minnesota and Illinois in the finals. But just to give a quick rundown of the gold-silver pool, Minnesota Blue in freestyle. Minnesota Blue takes home the title with a 33-31 win over Illinois in the finals. Ohio beat the Oklahoma Outlaws red team 40-23 for third. Michigan Blue beat New Jersey 37-27 for fifth, and Iowa Red defeated Missouri 40-32 for seventh. In Greco, Illinois, I don't have all the Greco results in front of me right this second, but Illinois beat Minnesota in the Greco finals. So those two teams, if you want to rewind it back to the cadet duels, those two teams, Illinois and Minnesota, met in the finals of every style at both the cadet and junior levels the last 2 weekends. I think that speaks volumes. To what those what those states have going from a club standpoint. I think you can look in the clubs in both states are really strong. We mentioned Pinnacle up in Minnesota with Brandon Paulson and Jared Lawrence. In the last couple of weeks, I know we talked about those guys and what they've got going on up there. Just a slew of those Minnesota kids through the middle where they got on such a good run against Illinois in the freestyle finals. Those are a bunch of Pinnacle kids right through the middle there. And I think it also speaks to the how much pride that they have in their states, the state programs, what they've got going on, because you don't see that in all the other states. Now, I think it'd be really cool if all the states had as much pride in putting together their absolute best teams as possible. And as you mentioned, Minnesota's a little shorthanded, but still they brought some hammers with them from top to bottom. On that team, a lot of guys that we're going to see at the next level. I mean, you're talking about just going down the line: Tyler Eichens, Jake Berglund, Alex Crow, Jake Aller, Alex Lloyd, who's going to South Dakota State, Daniel Kirkfleet going to Minnesota. I could go on and on about the talent in that. That
McKee's little brother was on that team too.
Yep. Yeah. Peyton Robb going to South Dakota State. Just really impressive lineup from top to bottom, and boy, they got on a roll in that final duel. What they take the first 8 matches, I think.
Yeah, it was such a crazy duel because it looked like, okay, they've got this on lock, and then it just went the other way. And, I think, you and I were texting, I think at some point, make sure we don't forget, we have to talk about Cameron Caffey. I mean, but this Illinois guys, Illinois is so deep. I mean, that's what's kind of scary. I think Minnesota, they missed 3 kids, but those kids had to wrestle a lot more matches. Illinois, they had guys who were kind of splitting time. And, I'm looking at the undefeated guys, the all undefeated team, and there's a ton of Minnesota and Illinois just sprinkled throughout here. So it was really fun to watch. And, I think I'm more of a casual fan of cadets, and I start following them more in juniors, obviously looking to see where I'm going to put kids in rankings and things like that. But there's just a ton of super talented kids that are wrestling, and the level of wrestling and the level of tactics at that age is really, really incredible to watch.
You mentioned Minnesota being without some guys, Illinois as well. I mean, Jacob Warner wasn't there, Austin Gomez wasn't there, Justin Renneria. So there's some hammers, right? Yeah, yep. There were some hammers that from Team Illinois that weren't there as well. But as you mentioned, the depth so strong top to bottom that you can take guys like that out of your lineup and still be right there to possibly win a championship. I mean, Thing is, you mentioned the scoring system in this, David. Minnesota takes the first 8 matches, and yet Illinois had 7 points on the board. They scored in 7 of those 8 matches, which came up, that ended up being really pivotal in the end when it's coming down the wire, because Illinois rips off what they get 1, 2, 3, 4 in a row to get right back in it, and they still had some studs at the back end. So the real big match in that sequence that we had kind of touched upon, Aller and Bronigal. David, you had a mat side seat for that. It was 15-14. Jake Aller ended up winning that match. But and for our listeners that want to go back and watch it, that match is up on Track Wrestling. If you want to go check it out,
and
I encourage you to do so.
They should watch that match.
Yeah,
for sure.
But just give a quick recap of what you saw down there.
Well, it was interesting because I actually grabbed quick lunch right before that, and I was sitting with Bronigal's dad, and he's like, man, I really hope they put him in the lineup this round. So Bronigal kind of jumped out to a lead, and then there was a scramble on the edge of the mat, and I think Bronigal did go out of bounds, and then Aller hit him in kind of like a little headwind. Bronigal's on his knees, and he kind of hit him like in a little mini headlock for 4, and they thought it was 4, but, it got white paddled, and they didn't challenge it, which was interesting. I think that was the right call. I think the challenge would have been denied, and then you wouldn't have your brick anymore. But that comes into play later because Aller's playing catch-up, gets a takedown. It kind of goes right into a lace. And you could argue it was kind of continuous, but that's when Minnesota did throw the brick. And they only gave 2 originally, and they ended up giving 2 and 2 for the lace, which, again, I think was the right call. Aller ties it up, or almost ties it up, and then Bronigal steps over him. I mean, they're just going, it's like Aller almost catches him and just keeps going back and forth. And finally, Aller's on top of him, gets a takedown. It's 14-10. Aller gets a takedown somewhere with 15 to 20 seconds, maybe 15 to 10 seconds, somewhere in there. And Bronigal covers the hands while Aller's trying to hit a gut. And they verbally warn him, and he doesn't let go, and they verbally warn him. And then right when he kind of simultaneously when he lets go, they go caution in 2. And that makes it 14-14. And literally, they each had 7 2s. So it came down to the last point of caution. Illinois challenged it. They reviewed it for a long time. They went with the original call, so the final score of the match became 15-14 instead of 14-14. But it was Illinois had to challenge. They had nothing to lose because the time literally was off the clock. So I actually talked to Sammy Julian, who, might be the best referee we have in America, and he was on the review board. And I said to him, I go, is that the right call? And I didn't actually realize he was on the review board. He goes, well, yeah, I'm on the review board. And I'm like, okay, why is that the right call? And he said, they didn't even have to warn him twice, that they warn you once, and if you don't immediately release the defensive hold, the call is caution in 2. And he goes, we're very much indoctrinated to folk style where stall calls are slower and they don't count for as many points. And he goes, but it was the right call. He goes, by the letter of the law, it was absolutely the right call. It was absolutely an unpopular call, but it was the right one. So I'm actually been in touch with Sammy. I'm going to try to get him on Match Chat in the next week or 2. I actually think a lot of us are just watching freestyle and Greco the right way, or wrong way, from a rules perspective. And I really just kind of want him to educate, me, and then I think if I don't fully understand it, I'm guessing a few other people may not understand it as well, and really just try to understand things better. So it was a crazy match, though, and Aller, talked to us afterwards, and he said he kind of just hung out for a couple of weeks and not done a lot of training, and that kid just dug deep and found a way to win. And I don't think Bronigal did anything to hurt his stock. I think, if anything, he showed he can go with one of the best kids in the country.
So a couple other big turning points in that match, pivotal matches in that duel, or at least highlight bouts in that duel. 126 pounds, Jake Galiva beat Joey Melendez 7-4. for a win for Minnesota. And also Alex Lloyd mentioned he's going to South Dakota State. He teched North Carolina-bound Jamie Hernandez 11-0 during that early avalanche for Team Minnesota. You mentioned Cameron Caffey, Illinois, 12-0 tech over Brandon Moen at 182 pounds. And Jack Jessen moves up to 195 and wipes out Daniel Kirkfleet 10-0 there. So that was when Illinois started to get back in it. In the end, Paxton Crease of Minnesota at 100 pounds pretty much put it away with a 10-0 tech there over Austin Nash. But David, Cameron Caffey was a guy that caught your eye probably about 2 months ago up here, actually early April, first weekend of April, last weekend of March, just down the street from me here at the Uni Dome. Folk Style Nationals, that was a guy that really surfaced that weekend that I learned a lot about that weekend, and sort of a guy that popped on some radars late, and he is headed to Michigan State, but you were thoroughly impressed by what you saw from Cameron Caffey this weekend.
Yeah, this weekend, and you and I, but I saw him wrestle in our East-West All-Metro meet, the one that was literally the day before or 2 days before Border Brawl. And I coached against him. And I texted you that night. I'm like, there is a kid who is a freak on this Illinois team. And he reminded me a lot of Le'Veon Mays. Like, it was under the radar. And the same thing when I coached against Mays when he was a senior in high school in that same meet. And I think some of these kids in the St. Louis, Illinois area, they don't travel a lot in the summer. I don't know whatever reason that is. You know, I mean, there's always a lot of reasons. I don't want to get into it, but they don't travel. So if you don't travel, the only thing they really have to go off of is your state tournament. And unless you beat somebody of national note, people just kind of assume you're not that good. That guy's going to be really good. He is a man among boys. He's a little like Norfleet. I mean, just talented. And I mean, he made a big difference for that duel, even though it didn't end up helping him because, you know, Jessen moved up and then they moved Brucky up. And so, you know, and not only did those guys move up, but he and Jessen went 12-0s. You know, so it was 4-0.
12-0 and 10-0, yep.
Yeah, by 10-0, sorry. But, I mean, they tech fall with no points against. So big, you know, big team point swing there. So he's going to be really good. I remember texting you and you're like, yeah, he's going to Michigan State. I'm like, wow, that's good for those guys, you know, and, you know, that's a program where he won't get lost in the shuffle, you know, where they're not just overflowing with talent. I think he's a guy that if they take the time to develop him could be really special. And I think, you know, I would say I think he only won one state title. I think he's the kind of guy that people look back on and go, man, oh man, that guy, you know, really exceeded a lot of expectations. And there was another match in that duel that was kind of crazy. Jack Punky wrestled Patrick McKee, and he got up early on him. And McKee wrestles a lot like his older brother, where he ended up winning by a lot and never shot the whole match. Like, he just kept chest wrapping Jack Punky. So, I mean, it was just, you know, it's kind of interesting. Like, you know, tactically, I almost thought, well, if Punky stops shooting, maybe they'll put McKee on the clock, but that never happened. And, you know, when you have to start chasing points against a really good defensive wrestler, it becomes even harder to come back.
Yeah, that was, you know, going back to that duel from start to finish, though. I mean, it was one of those where you're kind of on the edge of your seat the whole time because you knew it could be down to the final match. And we saw that right before that with the Illinois and Ohio, as you mentioned, another 2-point duel, 32-30 that Illinois prevailed there. Dylan Regeson came through with a tech in the last match, kind of winner-take-all, 106-pound bout there for Illinois to put Illinois over the top. But, man, there were some really fun matches throughout the weekend, particularly on Saturday. I mean, you look, and even rewind, you know, we haven't talked about Greco yet, but there was and if you get the chance, go back and watch this. 68 points in a junior duels Greco bout. I
saw that on track.
Yeah, Tyler Murphy of Iowa and Florida's Stephen Villalobos put up 68 in a Greco shootout. I mean, I think it was like 34-32 34-31 or 35-33 was the final. And that thing, at the end of the first period, I want to say there were almost 40 points at the end of the first period in that thing. So, that was certainly one to watch. There were, we got another one up there, Christian Goen of Illinois, down 9-0 against Florida's Jacob Cochran at 100 pounds in Junior Greco. Comes back and wins. So that was the biggest comeback at day one. Also, Alex Kramer of Illinois, he was down 11-3 against Ohio State recruit Jaden Maddox in that Illinois-Ohio duel, that 32-30 duel. Kramer was down 11-3 after the break and comes back, and I think he won it 15-11, and there was just a ton of action in that match. That's the thing that I love about freestyle is, 11-3 in a folk style match is almost a death sentence. And for the most part, it is in freestyle, but your odds of coming back from a deficit like that are so much higher in freestyle and Greco. And we see it. We see it, not all the time, but semi regularly. You'll see stuff like this happen, which makes freestyle, in my opinion, really cool. I think it's, for me, the most entertaining form of wrestling.
And it's directly correlated. Forget the exposure rules that are different, and obviously they are. It's directly correlated to if you get behind, you just get a takedown, you act busy for 10 seconds, they bring you back up. It's not 2 for 1, it's 2 for 0. And I mean, that's why it's so much easier to make points up. 11-3, Lord only knows you got to get 7 takedowns, without backs. 11-3 in freestyle's 4 takedowns. That's a huge difference. So, and because the caution and twos are there and the push outs are there where, that's a gigantic difference too, right? Like I can sort of play the edge on the mat in bulk style and maybe get something, maybe not. It's super fun. Like you said, they're never out of it. And then the coaches are smart and the kids are so smart. They're like, if I am losing by a bunch to you, like, look, you've got to get a point. We just got to get a point out of this. So it's, 4-1, instead of 4-0 in the team score. So it makes it really interesting. And the other thing that's kind of crazy is they kept changing the starting weight of the duel during the first day. And so for the second day, you're like, okay, where are they starting this thing? And then you're kind of looking at the rosters and like, okay, they're going to come back on the back end. And at one point I thought Minnesota had it wrapped up. And I'm like, and then a buddy of mine goes, no, they still got those weights on the back end, those 100 and 106. And they're like, look, it's going to be hard for Kreese to lose, but, if they could beat him, they're going to win 106. And obviously you described it right where they split those two matches, but it was a barn burner. Those kids from Minnesota went crazy, and it was, super cool to watch. Unless you're rooting for one of those teams, if you're just a fan, it was really fun.
Any other prospects down there catch your attention?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of kids that, there's a lot of guys, I think, especially if you're kind of recruiting, you're not, the top 5 schools in the country. I think there's a lot of guys there that, I think Drew Matten or Sammy Sasso got beat, right? So, that's a big win.
He was up 6-0 in that match and kind of got hit with a cement mixer, ventriloquist, whatever you want to call it, and he got stuck. That match is on Track Wrestling as well, but in control of things, and all of a sudden, bam, he's on his back and in trouble. But certainly there was a ton of top talent in that tournament this weekend.
Yeah, the third place match had Mitch Moore go against Gefeller, and it was a boring match. It was 1-1, and it was just Gefeller won because he got the last point, on the shot clock stuff. And that's all it was. They just got caution and won. Things got a little chippy afterwards. But I think it kind of shows you that those kids will probably both be pretty good in college. There's just it's kind of hard to follow things. And, my role there is to kind of interview the right guys. So you kind of just stay near the front side of the bracket and, the top seeded teams. But, there are a lot of upsets and, obviously I have some connection to the Missouri kids. And a lot of those kids, they had some injuries and a lot of kids wrestling up a weight. And, those guys really pulled together well. I mean, they were far and away from their best strength and managed to make the top 8. So as a Missouri guy, I was proud of those guys, and it's just such a cool event to watch. And you can find the mats; it's pretty easy, and you just can kind of park yourself, and you can literally be 15 feet from the mat. I mean, I was literally leaning on the stage of the main mat, and part of it was I was with track, but I mean, I got to you're like 4 feet away from the edge of the mat. It was really fun to watch.
I tell you what, Oklahoma, they did not win the tournament. They finished 4th, but in terms of names, Oklahoma was far and away the top team in terms of names on that roster. I mean, Stud Morris at 106 pounds, Jet Taylor at 126, Rick Filippo at 145, Bear Hughes at 220. I mean, you're not going to find 4 better names than those guys. Montana Phillips at heavyweight. I mean, just top to bottom, Oklahoma bringing it from a name standpoint.
Yeah, 2 of those guys were in brawl. So, the Rick Filippo and Jet Taylor. Yeah, and Jet's got that hair that I'm sure will get cut when he gets on the Stillwater campus. But, yes, they win the name game for sure.
Anything else you want to hit from junior duels, or you want to move on to something else here?
Well, we can talk a little bit about those guys that transferred, right? Dalton Macri goes to North Carolina, and Madrigal transfers to Oklahoma. I mean, those are guys that could have an impact on those teams, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a situation for Macri, to move down there and roll around with Tony Ramos, Coleman Scott and company down there, leaving Cornell where there was some depth there. Cornell had some guys at 25 that, certainly not going to be a crushing blow for Cornell to lose him. But, Madrigal, a good gift for Oklahoma to land a verbal commitment from him. Lou Rosselli continues to recruit well. So a couple lightweight guys on the move. Madrigal, a guy that finished 3rd at the Ironman last year, gave Spencer Lee, gave him a go in that tournament, and he's got a pretty good resume as well. So mentioned good get for Oklahoma there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing when I read about Madrigal was there's another kid not staying in Illinois, right? I mean, she just talked about that. Macri, I thought identically what you thought about him rolling with those guys plus Kindig down there. And Cornell had Noah Baughman there at 25, and he didn't get into the tournament last year, but there's probably the biggest slight. I mean, he pinned Piccinini during the season. I mean, it was a neutral fall, but it's still a huge win in Stillwater. So he had some other good wins besides that. So it seems like that's kind of a win-win. You get a guy who's, good to another spot where they're not good, and then, I think both kids will probably flourish. So, I mean, those are my thoughts. Like I said, and you and I have talked about this. You're big on the Rosselli train, and I am as well. I think they're going to continue to build, and there was a lot of discussion about OU and Rosselli in Tulsa over the weekend for sure.
Well, we got some other stuff going on track wrestling this week. The Junior European Championships going on right now. David, you had a chance to catch up with John Smith. Matt chat with him. You also have one that's up now with Randy Couture. What are some of the highlights that came away from those 2 interviews?
Interviewing Randy was really fun and a little weird just because we're really, really pretty good friends. So, kind of just want to make sure, it doesn't digress into 2 guys, sitting around watching a game talking. One of the crazy things, I think, was, he only won 1 state title, which is interesting. And, his path where he went to the military first and then he went to Washington State, but they cut the program, so his clock stopped, and he came out with eligibility. And he was a 25-year-old freshman at Oklahoma State with 2 kids. And there were, Oklahoma State's not traditionally a Greco program at all. And he said one of his mentors was Kenny Monday. And he was telling, the story about how him and Kenny would wrestle matches with each other, and one day Kenny beat him in a Greco match, and then he turned around and beat Kenny in a freestyle match. And his reaction and, you know, retelling of that is probably worth listening to alone. He's just really a cerebral guy, and he's got a very interesting viewpoint on the McGregor-Mayweather fight, because people forget he fought James Toney in MMA in the UFC several years ago. And so, you know, obviously they went by MMA rules and not boxing rules, but he's one of the few guys that actually understands that. So he's a super humble guy. And then, you know, John Smith was awesome. You know, just let me set up the tripod and shoot it in his office, and nothing was off limits. I mean, one of the new pieces of news he broke was that there's not going to be national duels this year. And, you know, he's not happy about that, but, you know, he's like, we got to figure out the right way to do it. Really just his thoughts on, you know, I started out with asking him about, you know, the state of USA wrestling, you know, from a global point of view. I got his opinions on whether or not he thinks wrestling collegiate and folk style versus, you know, the guys that are in freestyle, what his thoughts are on that. His viewpoint of like what Jaden Cox and Kyle Snyder had to go through, you know, where they medaled and then had to come back and compete, because he did the same thing, albeit it was in a world championship, not an Olympic championship. He said something super unique that every one of these guys always answers one question in a way I never thought they would answer. He said he actually believes his world medals are more valuable or were harder for him because there's more guys that wrestle in the world championships than the Olympics, because you have to qualify for the Olympics, and that's obviously going to be even less spots with the new changes. And he said, you know, there's guys that make the world tournament that aren't going to win it, but they have the ability just to screw you up. You know, they're a bad matchup for you. And he goes, so I've always thought winning the world championships were harder. And so I thought that was really a unique perspective from a guy that's obviously qualified to have that perspective. So, and, you know, he talked about his philosophy on coaching, how long he's going to coach, coaching his son. And we covered a lot of subjects. It was cool, a little nerve-wracking, but I was behind the camera, so after a while it just felt like doing it on the phone. And John Smith's a great guy and unbelievably smart guy, huge ambassador for wrestling, and I just want to publicly thank him for giving me so much time and giving us so much time for track wrestling.
Well, that's awesome. You can check that out on Track Wrestling coming up on Friday. Also, interviews up from the Gable Golf Outing, the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum golf outing last weekend on Hall of Fame weekend for the museum. I was up in Waverly at the golf outing, caught up with two-time NCAA champion, 1999 world champion, and three-time Super Bowl champion Stephen Neal. Really fun interview with him. And also caught up with Iowa State coach Kevin Dresser and Purdue coach Tony Ursuline. They were both there. Fun day up there. Lots of fun playing golf up there in that deal. You know, Mark
Who can actually play golf out of all those guys? Who's actually a pick out of all those guys?
I'm going to tell you this. We got third. We were ahead of my group was ahead of Ursuline and Dresser and company. So
does that mean you're actually better or more foot wedges? That's what I need to know.
I tell you what, I had some we had some ringers on our team. We had some guys that could play some golf. And
who was your squad? Anybody I know?
Ironside. Mark Ironside was on my group. He would be the one that you would know.
Okay.
But we joked around. Ironside had to leave at the turn, and I think we were like 4 under at the turn, and finished 12 under. So once we got rid of Ironside, we started playing a lot better.
Dead weight.
No, we had a lot of fun. We had a fun group of guys, and some guys that we had some really good players in that group, and also some guys that just picked each other up when we somebody always came through in the clutch on that.
Nice.
It, finished a couple shots back, but a lot of fun, and it was great having the opportunity to talk to Stephen Neal. Asked him about just his thoughts on what would a Stephen Neal, Kyle Snyder matchup look like with Stephen Neal in his prime against Kyle Snyder right now, which would be A lot of fun to think about that, David. I imagine you got a chance to see Stephen Neal when he was making his run for NCAA and world titles. What are your thoughts on that? How would you see a matchup like that going?
I haven't listened to the interview yet because I just got in at like 6 o'clock yesterday, but I guess my first thought is Stephen Neal would have a big weight advantage. You know, he's a legit 240, 250, I'm thinking, when he wrestled. To me, it would seem like a lot of, who controlled the distance, right? Like Stephen Neal was really, really good in space, and Snyder doesn't shoot that much from space. A lot of his stuff is at least off of short ties. I think it's sort of be equal on parterre. I don't think a lot of them do that. And did you ask the question in terms of folk style or freestyle?
I was just asking in general terms, like kind of whichever way he wanted to take it. But, I suppose you look at it two different ways, right?
Seat. Yeah, I know I pay for a front row seat. I think folk style would probably favor Neal just because if either one of them could ride, then that weight becomes a factor. And Snyder's shown he's not a big fan of training to get off on bottom. Pretty much doesn't do it. But yeah, those are like those epic dream matches, right? Like, they're those guys. I mean, when I was visiting with John Smith, I don't know if I told you this, but I actually wrestled live with him. Like, I don't know, maybe it was 20 years ago now, and I kind of got suckered into it. I didn't know I was going to work out with him, and this is like maybe 5 years after he got done, competing. And you watch guys like that, and I was pretty good back in the day. I mean, I won my share of stuff. I mean, I wasn't obviously at his level, but I wasn't a bum by any stretch. And I think I went with him for 50 minutes live and got one takedown. and my dad, who never says anything nice when you're getting beat, said to me afterwards, he goes, "You didn't do bad." I go, "I didn't do bad." I did. I go, "I got beat 400-1. He goes, "You got one." So, I mean, that kind of puts it in perspective. And, I asked Coach, I said, "I don't know if you even remember this, but it was very memorable for me. Do you remember this?" And he's kind of had a smile, kind of a sly smile on his face. He goes, "Yeah, I remember." So I think there's a lot of us that have been, victims of that, where he is the windshield and we're the bug. So when you think about guys at that level wrestling each other, and John talked about that, I asked him about how the Jim Jordan match affected him, and I think, I don't want to give it away, like people should, when this comes out, they need to watch it or listen to it. And I'm sure you guys will put the whole thing up and then maybe put up segments of it about specific subjects and topics. But he's really honest, and it's interesting. You said this last week when we previewed it, just picking a guy's brain that's that smart like that. It's super cool, so. Yeah, the Neal match with Snyder would be epic. I mean, I guess, if you have a recency bias, you kind of think, okay, Snyder, but Stephen Neal's pretty freaking good and obviously super athletic. He never played football like in high school or college, did he?
Yeah, correct. And we talked about that as well in that interview. I asked him, how did you go from not playing football to, into the NFL with, becoming a 3-time Super Bowl champion with the Patriots. And he tells a story about how it basically started with, Bruce Baumgartner's heavyweight camp. He was there, kind of got an invite through that, talking to I can't remember if he said a scout or an agent that wanted him to go try out with the Patriots. And so he went and did that. And, he talked about being in camp, and while he was in camp, he, obviously didn't know much about football, but they appreciated his effort. And he said that, basically he looked at conditioning drills as his chance to shine, and he tried to dominate conditioning drills. And there weren't a lot of people that thought highly of that in terms of teammates, kind of thought he was showing them up or whatever. But
sure.
But that was his way to get noticed and get the chance to come back and be on a practice squad and got his foot in the door, and that was the key. He talks about like all the advantages he had from the standpoint of knowing how to use his hands, knowing how to use leverage, balance, stuff like that. And it's really fascinating to hear his take on it, how he transitioned from that to becoming a mainstay on a team that won 3 Super Bowls. So pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, when I was in high school, we had a guy that won state as a junior at 138 pounds, and he went to 145 and won it. Ended up being a Division I All-American at Missouri. Greg Warren, he's a stand-up comedian, super funny, cool guy. His senior year, he wanted to play football, and he's walking around at 170, and he went out for center, and he started at center, and I was like, "Are you crazy?" And he's like, "These guys don't understand leverage at all." And he goes, obviously I'm not big. He goes, but I can get underneath these guys, and all I got to do is kind of just hold them off for 2 or 3 seconds. He goes, if you understand leverage, it's really not as hard as you would think. I'm like, it sounds really hard. But, at his size, but he did it great. I mean, it was, he started the whole year and did a great job for our high school. But that sticks out of my mind because, he's probably going against guys 100 pounds bigger than him and handling it. So it was, yeah. But it's certainly different being able to pull that off in high school versus being able to pull that off in the NFL. So it's, I'll have to go back and listen to that. I think that's the interesting stuff that you're so good at getting out of people, that those are just things you wouldn't expect, that if the conditioning drills make sense that he had to excel there, and it also makes sense that the other guys would be ticked off because that's where they're trying to chill, so all of that makes a lot of sense.
Well, David, switching gears, the big thing on the calendar this past Saturday night in terms of wrestling, after the junior duels ended, all eyes were on Aaron Pico. And I imagine you had a chance to watch that. Little St. Louis connection in there as well. Yeah. Share your thoughts with what you saw there and the connection to St. Louis and what transpired there in that Bellator fight.
Well, I'm actually friends with Zach Freeman, who won. He trains out of a gym here in St. Louis, St. Charles MMA, who the coach is Mike Rogers. Mike used to be one of our assistant coaches at Merrimack for a couple of years. He was a Division II All-American at SIU, Edwardsville. Very, very good coach and very skilled in jiu-jitsu. He's a big dude, but he's a black belt, and he doesn't horse guys. He's very good. And those guys are very good at all sorts of guillotine series and armbar series. And one of the things I think, if you've ever done jiu-jitsu, and I've obviously done some, is when you get put in those guillotines, you think you have to try to back out, and that actually makes your neck longer and makes it easier for the guy to finish. And you actually are supposed to go forward and attack the hands depending on the handle that the other guy has. Pico just looked really starstruck. He looked like he just wasn't ready. I don't think they've spent enough time with him on his jiu-jitsu. I certainly think he's a huge prospect, but Zach Freeman made a lot of money for himself, Saturday night. I couldn't be happier for him. He's a super nice kid, really respectful, St. Louis high school kid, wrestler. And, I think, they've got him, he's probably going to fight another top 10 guy, fight a top 10 guy next, and he can get paid well for that. I actually coached a guy named Rob Washington against him in a fight that was just a barn burner. It was the fight of the year in St. Louis a couple years back, and it just shows you in fighting anything can happen. And there was a bunch of fights like that, where Chandler got his, broke his ankle, and then Mitrione and Fedor punch each other like Rock'em Sock'em robots and knock each other down at the same time. Fighting's crazy. You literally have a puncher's chance. I think Pico needs to go back and spend a lot more time on his jiu-jitsu. And, I do wonder if anything will happen, like if they'll think about, letting him go back into wrestling now, because I think I read his contract would allow him to do that. So there's a lot of speculation, but, really, really happy for Zach. I'll be honest with you, I was really surprised, but happy for him. And, I hope Chandler recovers quickly. He wrestled for the Wilhelm brothers here in Northwest House Springs in St. Louis, and they're awesome dudes. They're awesome coaches. They're my age. We grew up together, wrestled together. Chandler's really the pride of St. Louis, him and Woodley here in St. Louis in terms of fighting. and definitely the pride of that school. And, you know, I mean, he lost fair and square, but it's kind of a goofy way to lose, and I'm sure he'll get a rematch, you know, right away. So just a weird night of fighting in Bellator. Like, some of the results were kind of crazy how they happened. And you know, and then Johnny Hendricks misses weight, up 15 pounds, still misses weight the next day at the UFC. So kind of just a bizarre weekend of MMA in that world, for sure.
Anything else for this week, David?
No, if people have time, they should listen to Randy. He was awesome. I'm literally sending you the John Smith video as we speak, and I'm going up to Cleveland in a couple weeks to get some stuff ready for nationals, and I think I'm going to talk to the guys up there at St. Edward's High School and Defense Soap. So, you know, just kind of doing some things, you know, before we head back into the fall and really focus hard on the you know, the previews. But this is a fun time of the year to kind of go out of my comfort zone a little bit and talk to some different guys. Like I said, I am going to try to get Sammy Julian on, and I'm going to try to get Zeke Jones and Dan Gable on all before the season starts.
Awesome. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of Weighing In with Andy Hamilton and David Mirikitani. David Mirikitani, thank you as always.
Thank you.
And you can check back to trackwrestling.com for all of the coverage of the junior duels, David's interviews from down there in Tulsa, as well as some of those highlight matches. All the matches are up on Track Wrestling. And Junior European Championships going on right now. That's live on Track Wrestling, so check that out as well. And David and I will be back next week.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.